Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give our attendees just a couple more moments to join us, and then we'll get started. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today to take a deep dive into the Bar Success Grants programs here at AccessLex. My name is Rob Hunter. I'm a senior research analyst at the AccessLex Center for Legal Education Excellence, and joining me today are Lauren Walker, who is also a research analyst at the center, and Kristen English, who is our grants program administrator at AccessLex. I'd like to dwell on this slide for just a moment. The text on it is so important that I am going to read it directly to you. AccessLex, through student-focused initiatives, research, and policy advocacy, works to help purpose-driven students find their paths from aspiring lawyers to fulfilled professionals. I'm sorry, I'm getting a message that no one is able to hear anything. This is often the case with these, that we have to iron out some technical issues at first. Please bear with me. All right, it would appear that most of our participants can hear. Great, thank you so much. All right, great. So forgive me. Again, I said I was going to dwell on this slide, and indeed I shall. AccessLex works to help purpose-driven students find their paths from aspiring lawyers to fulfilled professionals. We partner with nearly 200 member law schools to improve access and to influence legal education, and we have been doing so since 1983. And I want to gloss this a little bit and identify three values that are really important to AccessLex and that are part of our mission. Those are access, affordability, and value. We are deeply invested in promoting access to legal education, to improving the affordability of legal education, and to maximizing its value for all aspiring attorneys. With that in mind, I'd like to briefly go over the agenda for today's webinar. So I'm going to begin by briefly giving you an overview of our major grant programs here at AccessLex. But of course, our focus today will be on our Bar Success grant programs. We will then share with you the technical details of the process for applying for a grant with AccessLex. And then we're going to take a considerable amount of time to discuss what we consider to be the elements of strong proposals for our Bar Success grants programs. We will then share some of our application resources with you, and of course, dedicate a lot of time, as much as possible, to questions and answers. So I'd like to remind you of those values that I just articulated. We pursue those values in our grant making by moving the needle in legal education. That is to say, we want to encourage and support research and curricular innovation that is going to help students to succeed academically in law school and to succeed by passing the bar and joining the legal profession. And we hope that in so doing, we can help foster an inclusive and diverse legal profession for us all. So our three major, grant programs. I'm sorry, now I'm getting a message that people are unable to see me. One moment, please. If anyone could briefly share with me whether or not they could see me, I would greatly appreciate it. The idea is for this to be a face-to-face conversation in addition to a slideshow. So I'm hearing that people can only see my colleague, Kristen. I do want my little webcam shutter is open, and I do have a green box, that a green connected signal. This is unfortunate, but in the interest of time, we're going to press ahead, and if possible, we will address this later on. So again, I apologize for this. We have three major grant programs. The Diversity Pipeline Intervention Grant Program focuses on aspiring law students, and it seeks to broaden access to legal education and increase the diversity of law school bodies. And then, of course, the two grant programs that we're going to focus on today are the Bar Success Intervention Grant Program, which focuses on curricular innovations that will increase passage rates among students and graduates who are most at risk of not passing the bar, as well as the Bar Success Research Grant Program, which supports efforts to better understand what's going on with the bar exam, what are the best ways that students can be prepared for it, what are the relationships between bar success and the professional competence of new lawyers. Now I'm going to have things over to Lauren, who is going to briefly introduce the Bar Success Intervention Grant Program. All right, again, I apologize. It would seem sorry, we're getting a little bit of technical feedback here. Lauren's going to log back in, but I'm going to go ahead and briefly discuss the Bar Success Intervention Grant Program. So as I said, this is focused on curricular innovations, concrete, discrete steps that are taken at a law school in order to increase the predicted likelihood of bar passage for students who are most at risk of not passing. And this, of course, serves and fulfills our goal of increasing access to the legal profession. I'm hearing that Lauren might now be able to speak. One moment, please. Lauren, would you like to take the reins? Okay. I'm going to carry on. So again, please bear with us. Applications for the Bar Success Intervention Grant Program must specify interventions that will have a duration of between 12 to 24 months, so that's 1 to 2 years, and they must seek funding in the amount from $150,000 to $300,000. They must focus on a particular student population. We are interested in law students or recent graduates who are most at risk of not passing the bar exam. Alternatively, we are interested in students who are at institutions or who have recently graduated from institutions whose ultimate bar exam passage rates fall below 70%. Ultimate here means not first time, but the overall passage rates over time. Applications to this grant program must have clear statements of the goals and measurable objectives of the intervention. And I assure you we're going to talk in greater depth about precisely what we mean by program goals and what are measurable objectives. That is a theme that we're going to touch on again and again. And then finally, and this is crucially important, applications to the Bar Success Intervention Grant Program must include evaluation plans. And we'll speak in greater depth about those as well. There are some optional elements that will be given preference in the selection process for applications to the intervention grant program. The first of these is if the application specifies that there will be differential treatment of participants for the purposes of the program evaluation. Essentially, this means, will you administer two or more different kinds or flavors of intervention in an effort to see which seems to be serving the target population best. We are also going to give priority to those applications that specify how long-term support will be made available to participants after the formal period of the intervention has concluded and the grant duration has expired. Finally, we will also give preference to those applications that specify how those who are applying will collaborate with other institutions, with other faculty at cognate departments or programs at your university, or other organizations that are working in the legal education space. Oh, whoops. Again, apologize for the technical difficulties. The Bar Success Research Grant Program, by contrast, focuses on well-designed and rigorous empirical research of the bar examination. And we take a very broad view of what constitutes rigorous empirical research, and I will talk in greater depth about this later on. But for the moment, just to get an introduction to it, we are interested in studies that look at determinants of bar success and what are those factors, such as academic indicators, that are predictive of bar exam performance. We're also interested in studies of alternative test designs and thinking about what the bar exam of the future might look like in terms of assessing the minimum competence of aspiring attorneys. And we're also interested in studies on what are the most effective ways for students to prepare for large-scale standardized tests such as the bar exam. We welcome proposals, these are examples, we welcome proposals on other topics as well, so long as the animating research question is focused on the bar exam. And I want to assure those who are asking questions in the chat that yes, these slides will be made available upon the conclusion of our webinar today. And if you have specific questions, my colleagues are taking the queue, and we will make sure to address them at the end of the webinar. Again, much like the Bar Success Intervention Program, to be fundable, proposals must have a duration of, the study must have a duration of 1 to 2 years, and it must seek funding in the amount of $150,000 to $300,000. Again, we are flexible as to the research methodology that you select, so long as it is rigorous and it is appropriate for the research question that is driving your proposal. And now, Kristen is going to talk about the administrative aspects of applying for a grant.
Yeah, so we'll do a quick walkthrough of the steps in our application process, and you can find this information on the grant application policy page on our website. All application and supporting materials must be submitted through our online system, so you will need to create an account in that system to apply for a grant. Your first step should be to make sure your organization and program meet our eligibility requirements by reviewing the grant program resources and policy found on our website. AccessLex funds proposals from our member law schools and from other tax-exempt US-based nonprofit and public organizations. So to be eligible, your program must align with the program-specific funding priorities that Rob has discussed. After you've determined your eligibility, you'll need to create an account in our online grant system to begin your LOI. The LOI form is designed to elicit brief information about your project as outlined on this slide. Your responses should help reviewers to better understand the purpose of your proposal and how your intervention or research will be structured and implemented. We do require a brief budget narrative when you're submitting your application that will outline how the funds will be allocated if you do receive an award. So all of the LOI are reviewed and applicants are informed whether or not they're invited to submit a full proposal. Not everyone that submits an LOI will be invited to submit a full proposal. Our Bar Success grant programs are currently open and we're accepting LOI, so the deadline to submit is May 31st. A select number of applicants are invited to submit a full proposal, and an invitation to do so does not guarantee that your proposal will be funded. The responses in the full proposal should build on and clarify information from your LOI, not simply restate it. Proposals need to include a detailed timeline of your project and give the milestones, as well as an itemized budget that should be on the AccessLex budget template that is available in our online application system. So our budgets are broken down by direct and indirect costs. We define direct costs as expenses that are directly attributed to the specific project or program, and indirect costs are non-specific project expenses that allow the organization to do business. The indirect costs cannot total more than 10% of your direct costs. And to find more information on this and a detailed breakdown of direct versus indirect costs, you can head over to the grant application policy on our website. So Rob will go into more detail shortly on the elements of a strong proposal. So after all proposals are reviewed, we do select a few applicants to receive a funding invitation. Not all applicants invited to submit a full proposal will receive funding, and those who do are required to execute a grant agreement within 90 days of that funding invitation. We do have a standard grant agreement that's available on our website, and we do ask you to review that grant agreement as part of the application process. And I do want to note that Section 6 of that grant agreement does contain some publicity provisions that we do want people to be aware of. The grant agreement also outlines the payment and reporting schedule, and all of the interim and final reports must be submitted through that online system. So now we'll see if Lauren is able to connect. I think she's going to go over some application trends.
We provide data on recent trends from previous application cycles. In 2019, we received 18 letters of inquiry and 9 full proposals and awarded 3 proposals for funding. In 2020, we received 27 letters of inquiry and 10 full proposals and awarded 2 proposals for funding. We do not have data yet for 2021 because the Bar Success grant programs are currently accepting submissions through May 31st, 2021. And the 3 proposals that we funded in 2019 were from the following schools: Hofstra University, Indiana University, and Roger Williams University School of Law. The 2 proposals that we funded in 2020 were American University and University of California Hastings College of Law. More information about the details of each proposal can be found on the AccessLex website. Now Rob will explain in greater detail the elements of a strong proposal. In the next slide, we will cover the elements of a strong proposal.
Hello, everyone. This is Rob Hunter. I'm curious to know if anyone can see me in addition to hearing me. Once again, you can only hear me. Again, we apologize for these technical difficulties. However, I'm going to now discuss the elements of a strong proposal for both programs. So I'm going to briefly list what are the key elements of a strong proposal for our intervention grant program, and then I'm going to discuss each of these in detail. So first, they should have a clear statement of their goals, objectives, and expected outcomes. And I'm going to discuss what exactly it is that we mean by the terms goal, objective, and outcome. And I want to stress that this comes first because it's woven into all of the other elements of a strong proposal. Second, a strong proposal to our intervention grant program will have a clearly defined scope, and it will have clear criteria for which students are eligible to participate. Third, it will have a manageable number of program components. There will not be too many moving parts. Four, of course, there will be a rigorous measurement plan to measure your outcomes and to help us and you make a determination of what worked and what didn't. And we are just as interested in what didn't work as we are in what did work. Fifth, there will be a well-defined timetable for how you're going to achieve all of your objectives. And sixth, the application will make it clear that the ways in which your intervention could be generalized, scaled, and made sustainable. And again, I will describe what each of these means. First, let's talk about goals, objectives, and expected outcomes. So the goal is essentially how you define success. What will success look like for your intervention when it is done? The objectives are the discrete, concrete steps that you are going to take in order to achieve that goal, and the outcomes are measurable results of the objectives that you accomplish, which will be able to document whether and the extent to which your intervention succeeded or did not. The scope and eligibility element essentially comes down to the question of who and how long. So who is eligible to participate in your intervention, and what will the duration of the intervention be? And we ask that you think very carefully about this, and not simply in terms of the manageable number of moving parts, which is the third element of a strong proposal, but also it will need to be carefully tied to considerations of the target population. So again, we are interested in assisting students who are either at institutions with ultimate bar passage rates that fall below 70%, or those students at any institution who are most at risk of not passing the bar. And this is the consideration that should be driving scope and participant eligibility concerns. Again, make sure that there aren't too many moving parts. Each of the program components for your intervention should be serving a specific purpose, whether it's making a specific outcome happen at a certain point in your timetable, or it's going to provide meaningful data. It will in some way directly contribute to your overall goal. Of course, a rigorous assessment and evaluation plan is crucial. Think carefully about the data that you are planning to collect, how you will collect it, whether or not you might need IRB approval or someone else's approval in order to obtain that data. And then think as well about how you're going to assess what is happening in your intervention. So let's take a few moments to talk about what I mean. Many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with the distinction between formative and summative assessments. Formative assessments are administered iteratively over the course of, well, a course or a program of study, and they are meant to provide both students and instructors with a rolling amount of information that can help them understand what they are learning, what they're not, what skills they are acquiring, and so on. Whereas a summative assessment is a one-time assessment meant to evaluate the overall level of knowledge or skill. Now, depending on your kind of the intervention that you are describing in your proposal, it may be appropriate to use a pre-post-test model where you administer a diagnostic test before the intervention and a summative evaluation at the end to measure the efficacy of the intervention in terms of some change in a variable of interest. Or it may be appropriate to have a number of formative assessments administered over the course of the intervention, or both. Again, there's no silver bullet here. We simply ask that you be thoughtful and deliberate and articulate about how you are going to assess your outcomes so that we can learn from this experience. Additionally, you should consider whether there are colleagues in your school or in associated programs if your law school is part of a larger university, or other organizations working in our space of legal education who might be able to assist with program evaluation. Naturally, it's important that the timetable that you specify in your application is well-defined and realistic, that everything can be achieved in the time frame that you lay out. And this is especially important in the case of intervention-based applications because there are multiple timetables that you have to be cognizant of, not simply the timetable that you've specified for your intervention, but also the academic year. Is the timing of your intervention going to be such that students will be able to work it into their academic schedules, if it's a co-curricular intervention, for example? Additionally, there's also the timetable of the bar exam itself. Will the intervention's timing in the calendar year be such that students will be best positioned to use the new skills or information that they have gained in order to succeed on the bar exam? Finally, strong applications have an emphasis on generalizability, scalability, and sustainability. So briefly, what I mean by generalizability is that similarly situated institutes, if your intervention is shown to be successful, is really making an impact with students in terms of preparing them for the bar, that intervention would be considered generalizable if it's one that similarly situated institutions could implement to assist their own students. That intervention would be scalable if it could be adopted more broadly in legal education, if a case could be made that, in fact, this is something that should be used more widely. Finally, that intervention would be considered sustainable if it can be demonstrated that it can be funded and continue operating even after the life of the grant agreement. Now, the research-based grant program, the elements of strong proposals are rather similar, but there are some important differences that I briefly want to discuss here. Naturally, they will have a clearly articulated research question or set of hypotheses, and these will have an appropriate theoretical framework that is helping to motivate why that question is important. Again, much like the intervention-based grant proposals, there will be a clear statement of how the data will be collected. What are the data sources? Are they public-facing? Are they private-facing? Will IRB approval be required? How are you going to preserve the anonymity of student-level data if that is what your project focuses on? And apropos of that, a strong proposal will also have a clearly defined scope and, if applicable, will make clear what the criteria for participants' eligibility are, if indeed you are focusing on human subjects. And again, that will also include considerations like IRB approval. Naturally, the research methodology needs to be sound, it needs to be rigorous, and it needs to be appropriate for the research question that is animating your proposal. Now, I want to emphasize that we take a broad view of what constitutes rigorous empirical research. We are not simply interested in multivariate regression analyses. We certainly are interested in multivariate regression analyses, but they are not appropriate for answering all of the research questions that could potentially be compelling proposals for this grant program. You may focus on panel data that you obtain from focus groups, or you may focus on transcripts from cognitive interviews. There are mixed methods approaches that may be appropriate depending on the research question that you articulate. All of these are acceptable, and we don't put our thumbs on the scale for any one of them. What's important is that it's sound, that it's appropriate for the research question, and that your research question focuses on the bar exam. Again, finally, just like with the intervention grants, it's very important to have a realistic timetable for completion. And again, both of these programs last from 1 to 2 years from the execution of the grant agreement. There's some additional considerations that I believe if Lauren is able to join us, we'll briefly discuss now.
Yes, thank you, Rob. There are additional considerations specifically for the Bar Success Intervention Grant Program. Applicants who are invited to submit a full proposal will be required to work with an independent evaluation consultant to develop evaluation questions and plans for data collection and analysis. This will be their opportunity to work one-on-one with an expert in program evaluation and assessment. And secondly, applicants will be required to upload a proposed monthly timetable of their program and assessment activities throughout the duration of the grant. This will help applicants to realistically plan out what programmatic or assessment-related activities they plan to accomplish during the grant period. And we also provided helpful tips regarding the elements of a strong proposal. Now, here are our recommendations on how to prepare your proposal. Plan ahead time to work on your proposal, including what you want to achieve with your intervention or research study. Proofread your proposal thoroughly to avoid any typos, missing information, or other grammatical mistakes. And finally, seek constructive feedback from subject matter experts and methodologists who are knowledgeable of the content and the research design. Now, Kristen will share additional information about our application resources.
So all of our grants programs operate on a review schedule similar to what you see here. The individual dates for each program are set annually. So as I said earlier, we are currently accepting LOI for our Bar Success research and intervention programs. The LOI are due on May 31st of 2021. We review all LOI, and we will then invite a select few applicants to submit a full proposal. So invitations are extended on or before July 31st for this Bar Success cycle. And then if you were invited to submit a full proposal, you will need to do so by September 14th. Then the applications are reviewed, and anyone who is invited to receive funding will be informed on or before November 15th. Funding is limited, so not all applicants that are invited to submit a full proposal will receive funding. And we do inform you whether or not you receive funding. There was a question in the chat about feedback if your proposal is not funded, and you can email us and we will provide some feedback. So you can visit our website for detailed information on our grants program, including previews of the LOI and full proposals, our application policy, frequently asked questions, and other resources. If you have questions about our grants program, your application, or you need assistance with either the grant application portal or our website, you can email us at grants@accesslex.org, and I'll route that email to Lauren, Rob, whoever needs to see it, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So now I'll turn it back over to Rob for our Q&A. Rob, are you still you still with us
I'm
here?
so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was muted, which is a shame because I was so eloquent in my apologies for the technical difficulties. As indeed I will have to be again. We apologize for the technical difficulties and that you are unable to see most of us. However, I am glad that you can hear us, and we are now going to spend the remainder of the hour taking your questions. Now, before we get to your questions, I want to emphasize that you can always ask us questions. There's an email, grants@accesslex.org, which is on the slide that you can see right now, and you should always feel free to submit questions to it. We will try to respond to it as quickly as possible, and depending on the topic, it's something that potentially Kristen might answer. It's something that Lauren might answer in her capacity as the liaison for our diversity and inclusion grants, or it's one that I may answer in my capacity as the liaison for our bar success grants. But we welcome all of your questions. We are committed to being transparent and to being partners with all of our member schools in helping them to do what's best for their students. So if you think of a question after the webinar ends today, you should still ask it. Please just email us at grants@accesslex.org. I'm now going to review the questions that are in the Q&A chat box. If you haven't already had the opportunity to use it, please feel free to go ahead and enter a question in there. I'm going to begin by responding to a question about how we define students who are most at risk, and then we will take it from there. So there's a question in the chat box of what is considered to be a student who is most at risk. Is that based on institution data or AccessLex info? Again, there are two main routes to identifying the population for your intervention grant application. Either you are at an institution whose ultimate bar passage rate, excuse me, if you're an institution that has an ultimate bar passage rate that is below 70%, or you are targeting the students at your institution, any institution, who are most at risk of not passing the bar. So that is to say, students who have have low academic indicators, who are from groups that have traditionally been underserved and have been unable to succeed on the bar exam as much as others. For any institution, there are students who are most at risk at that institution of not passing the bar. And those are the students whom we are most interested in helping by studying the efficacy of these interventions. Okay, next we have a question. How are you measuring ultimate bar passage? I'm curious because the ABA standard of 2-year ultimate bar passage is 75. So if 70% is interpreted the same way the ABA does, it might rule out just about every ABA-approved school. So if I understand the question correctly, it's about the fact that we are not focusing strictly on ABA standard 316. We are not excluding any schools from consideration for the intervention grant program simply on the basis of their ultimate bar passage rates. We are simply stating that it's appropriate for your intervention to target your entire student body if your institution is one where the ultimate bar passage rate is below 70%. However, that does not mean that if your bar passage rate is above 70% that you are ineligible to apply. It simply means that we are asking for a a targeted intervention that focuses on particular students at your school and not students as a whole. I also want to clarify I'm sorry, one moment, please.
I can hop in here really quick. So
Okay,
we do
great,
have
a
Bar Success invitation only grant. So if you have received an invitation to that grant program, you should apply based on the directions that you received and not submit during this May cycle. So that will be reviewed separately. So for those of you that may be here with us today that received an invitation, you can reach out to the grants@accesslex.org email box if you have a question or need the directions to access that invitation specific portal.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Now, if I may ask Lauren to field the question. We received a question, could you elaborate on differential treatment of participants for the purposes of program evaluation? Is this a reference to control and treatment groups?
So regarding that question, that was one of our optional elements that will be given preference in the selection process. The answer is yes. We are referring to treatment and control group methodology for the purposes of program evaluation.
Great, thank you. Received another question. Thank you for the presentation. Is sustainability a consideration? It is certainly a consideration. It's if you can demonstrate in your application that the intervention will be sustainable beyond the life of the grant period, that is definitely something that we take into consideration. It's not a required component, but if indeed you can demonstrate that, it will strengthen your proposal. Okay, another question. Will you provide a list of evaluation consultants for schools to use? Again, I would like to ask Lauren to respond to this question, if she may.
So what was the question? I'm sorry.
All right. So the question is, will AccessLex provide a list of evaluation consultants for schools to use?
So regarding that question, we currently do not provide a list of evaluation consultants, but applicants who are invited to submit a full proposal will work with an AccessLex retained evaluation consultant who will work one-on-one with the applicant to advance to the full proposal stage.
Great, thank you. And I also want to add on that if you have questions about evaluation, we are always happy to field them. Again, please give us an email at grants@accesslex.org, and we will do what we can to help you think that through. I also want to emphasize that although we welcome questions and we encourage everyone who applies to ask us questions as they are crafting their applications, that of course that conversation with us in and of itself is not necessarily something that will alter the likelihood of you either being invited to submit a full proposal or of your full proposal being accepted. Okay, another question. Is AccessLex interested in supporting programs or initiatives that propose and develop alternatives to the bar exam for bar eligibility? That's a great question, and the best answer that I can give you at this time is that you should contact us and send us an email at grants@accesslex.org so that we can have a conversation about what it is that you are contemplating, depending on the content of your proposal. It's maybe something that I would have a conversation with you about, as well as Sarah Berman, who is our director for bar success at AccessLex. It's difficult to say in the abstract whether or not that would be something that would be appropriate for the bar success research grant program. But again, we encourage you to reach out because it could potentially be very compelling. Okay, here's another question. Some of the optional elements you mentioned are collaboration with other institutions. Just curious, what does that look like? And did your previous winners collaborate with other institutions? So to be clear, it's a consideration, but it's not a requirement. And depending on what you're proposing, either for an intervention-based proposal or for a research proposal, it may not be necessary. Many of our grantees have worked solo, as it were, but some indeed have collaborated across institutions. I can think of some recent research grants in which that was the case. It's something that we encourage, but it's not something that we require, and will certainly not disqualify any application if it is being proposed on behalf of a single institution or a single organization. Forgive me while I make sure that I have answered all of the questions that are there so far. Okay, here's a new question. Is the evaluation consultant funded by AccessLex, or do we need to budget for that? I'm going to ask Lauren to correct me if I'm mistaken, but no, if you retain
for that question?
Yeah, actually, yeah, Lauren, if you would answer that, that would be great.
So the AccessLex will have their own evaluation consultant to work one-on-one with applicants who advance to the full proposal phase to enhance their proposed evaluation plan. Now, if for the intervention-based proposals in general, you are more than welcome to include an evaluation consultant or someone with evaluation expertise among your personnel. But all applicants who are invited to submit a full proposal will work with an AccessLex retained evaluation consultant. So I hope that clarifies things.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. And if there are any follow-up questions, please let us know, either now or by email later. Here's an excellent question, which is, what are the dates for the below 70% threshold? I assume this is referring to the ultimate bar passage rate of 70%. And I have to confess that I assume that this refers to up to 4 bar examination cycles, so 2 years. I believe that's how the ABA calculates ultimate bar passage, but I would invite Lauren to correct me if I'm mistaken about that.
Is this for the question regarding the dates for below 70%?
Correct.
I think I will need more information. I mean, is this regarding the bar exam? Or?
Yeah. So thank you. That's an excellent question. I urge you to send us an email at grants@accesslex.org, and we will clarify that for you. I do want to tentatively say that in general, ultimate bar passage is distinguished from first-time bar passage by 4 bar administration cycles or 2 years. So that was an excellent question. Thank you. I'm waiting to see if anyone else is furiously typing away a question in the Q&A box. I don't see any at the moment, but I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to have their questions be heard. So we will stay on the line. Again, if you have a question that you think of it too late, feel free to email it to us at grants@accesslex.org, or you can use the Q&A chat box on the On24 website, and we will read it and answer it right now. I want to take this opportunity to reiterate an answer that I gave to a question earlier. All of our member schools are, in principle, welcome to apply for an intervention-based grant, for an intervention grant. The 70% ultimate bar passage threshold is simply a way in which you can specify who the target population is for your intervention. So if your school has a very high bar passage rate, then the students at your school whom we are most interested in focusing on for the purposes of an intervention are those who are most at risk relative to the rest of the student body. That is how we can help fulfill our value and our commitments of increasing access to not only legal education, but the legal profession. So it's no institution is prima facie excluded from being eligible for the intervention program. I would also like to note that Sarah Berman, our Director of Bar Success, has weighed in with some clarification on the question about the timing of the 70% bar passage threshold. The relevant dates are the relevant rates are in the 2 years prior to the time when you apply for the grant. So that would be the bar outcomes for 2019 and 2020 if your intervention is targeting 2021 students. And if you do not have that data, then you can use the data from 2018 and 2019. Again, though, and this goes back to what I was just saying, any and all member schools are encouraged to apply for intervention-based grants. If you have any questions about who are the students that you should be focusing on, email us, give us a call, ask us, and we'll be happy to talk about it with you so that you can craft a letter of inquiry that will best focus on those students whom we most want to help. We've had a couple of questions entered into the chat box that have focused on the particulars of budgeting and the salary and benefits. Kristen has been answering those individually. I want to give Kristen a moment to make any general points if she thinks that's important for all of our attendees to hear. But it does look like people's individual questions have been answered.
Yes, we've gotten a few questions asking about the detail we request regarding the budget during the LOI phase. We don't ask for an itemized budget at that time. We do have a question that we ask you to give us a budget narrative that will give us an overview of how the funds will be spent if they are awarded, but it does not need to be a detailed itemized breakdown at that time. It should include categories and then can include amounts that you think will be allocated to those so that we can see how you're getting to the total amount you're requesting. If you're invited to submit a full proposal, that is when you're expected to complete an itemized budget spreadsheet that is available in the grants portal and on our website that you're expected to upload with your application. So the LOI phase is really just a general overview so that we can get a sense of how you're coming up with the amount you're seeking and where the funds will be going. It does not need to be detailed and itemized. We had some other questions about salaries and benefits, and we can support salaries and benefits. It should not make up your total request amount. You should have other expenses in there as well, and you can find more details about that on our website, or you can email your individual questions to grants@accesslex.org.
Thank you so much, Kristen. We have 5 minutes remaining, and I want to make sure that anyone who has a question that they have not yet been able to answer, if you ask, that they ask it now. We did just receive one now. Is it realistic to start a program on January 1st, 2022? That is a contextually specific question, I would say. It depends very much on whether it's an intervention or a research proposal and what the scope of either one of those would be. In principle, there's no reason why it couldn't, but if you have concerns about the timing of what you're proposing, again, we ask that you reach out to us as soon as possible. There are 4 minutes remaining. While I wait for anyone who hasn't yet asked a question to type it in, let me remind everyone that this presentation has been recorded. It will be made available to you. My understanding is that the recording should be available within about 12 hours or so. If you have any trouble accessing it, just please send us an email and we'll be happy to share it with you. Scott, an interesting question here about how we are addressing the unusual use of diploma privilege in calculating bar passage. Louisiana, for example, is doing it this year due to COVID-19, but probably won't continue doing it. An excellent question. Again, talk to us if you are concerned about whether it will affect the eligibility of your students. A point that I really want to emphasize again is that no institution is excluded from eligibility for the intervention grant program. It's simply a question of whether you are targeting all the students at your institution or simply those who, relative to the other students at the institution, are most at risk of not passing the bar. But that is definitely something to keep an eye out for. There are going to be a number of wrinkles in ultimate bar pass rate calculations owing to everything that has happened in the past 15 months. One final question, will the slides be available separately or just the recording? We are asking our colleague who is assisting with the technical aspects of that question right now. I myself am not sure, but the recording will be available. So you'll get to hear me in addition to seeing the slides, if nothing else. I'm hearing that it should be possible simply to supply the slides. So stay tuned. And if you are interested in only the slides and not our voices, please reach out to us. And I think that we should be able to supply you with them. But in any event, the recording will certainly be made available. And let me emphasize one last time, any questions, any at all, please contact us. We are eager to hear from you. And that email address is on your screen. And once again, it is grants, GRANTS, @accesslex.org. And we want to thank everyone for joining us today, for bearing with us as we face some technical challenges. And we are really excited to see all of this interest in our grants programs. And it's always heartening to know just how big is the community of people who share our values and our commitments to legal education. So thank you everyone very much on behalf of myself and Lauren and Kristen. And once again, one last reminder, if you have any questions, email us. Please let us know. Thanks very much. Goodbye.